Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very, very much for joining this 5JA webinar. We are focusing today on the North American V2X commercial deployments aided by the published SCMS Certificate Policy. This was work completed within the 5G Automotive Association, driven by our members, who will spend the next hour walking you through not just the work that was done, but the context within which it was done and why it is so important. Before we get started, though, my name is Dominic. I am part of the 5JA Secretariat, and I'm very, very happy to be moderating this discussion. I'll now hand the floor over to our three distinguished speakers, who will be guiding you through the work of 5JA on this critical topic. So I will hand the floor over to Joachim to begin the introductions. But before I do, as my colleague Victoria has posted in the chat, any questions, we very much encourage them. Please post them throughout the webinar. There is a Q&A option that you have on the top of your screens. Please post any and all questions that you have and comments, and we'll make sure that they get to the speakers and you get your answers. So without further ado, Joachim, I'll hand the floor over to you to introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Peter and William. Joachim, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Dominic. Thank you very much. And hello, everybody. For this webinar, it's an honor for me to really give you some introductory words. But first of all, my name is Joachim Goethel. I'm with BMW, and I'm in the 5GAA since more or less the foundation of this association. I'm board member there, and I'm taking care in the company for the 5G technology introduction and some other electronics architecture topics nearby, let's say. So therefore, it's a pleasure for me to give you really some of the explanation what we think was the motivation and also the reasoning for the work we have been doing in 5GAA. So if we switch to the next slide, please, then you see that BMW has been supporting complementary modes of V2X in the cellular connectivity from the very first day on. And that means we both support the direct communication as well as the network-based communication as well. And this is really depending on the use cases. We really rely on onboard sensors, and this is, let's say, kind of an equilibrium we have to find, and this really depends on the functionality we want to use. We see in the past that there have been a lot of discussions with the introduction of the technology, especially on the direct communication side, and we see regional differences. For example, we clearly saw these first steps from China introducing, let's say, from the standards, the directions of the market introduction and the deployments. And no wonder it is also the first market where we clearly, as BMW, and in a China variant, launched V2X. And we announced this, and some of the distinguished members of 5GAA saw a presentation already in our Paris face-to-face meeting, during the meeting week, in a community building session, where we showed some of the functionality more or less built on day one use cases for safety, for road safety. But these are really in the market for certain models, and we launched, let's say, this introduction. So that means it's really going on. It's going live. It got momentum in China. It has experienced some layback, both in Europe as well as in the US, but especially from the ITS World Congress in Atlanta, we saw a lot of momentum for V2X in the US, and therefore I think it's a good opportunity here to go into more details of what we really need for a deployment and for a broad rollout. So if we switch to the next slide, please, you can see, just a moment, that we face quite some specific conditions, some challenges, and we have some prerequisites as a vehicle manufacturer in this field, because it is a complex ecosystem. It's not just about cars, it's about multiple variants of users on the road, but also on the infrastructure side. For the road authorities, there are a lot of players in this area. So that means it really is a challenge to ensure interoperability in such a heterogeneous system. We, as an OEM for vehicles, we really strive for a kind of uniformity in the electronics architecture. I mentioned my tasks in this field within BMW as well. And our target really is to have as much as possible, even though it's getting, let's say, more and more difficult, to try to find a worldwide solution for all our vehicles. And third point, we really see a wide range of functionality where we could use V2X in the future. Well, as I said, at the moment, starting over from day one safety use cases, but there is safety, there is traffic efficiency, there is this driving dynamics, there is driving assistance up to automated mobility. And as I mentioned, there is momentum US. We heard a lot about V2X based calling ideas for the US, for the North American market. So there's a lot to come up for V2X, we think. And there is one clear need, which obviously has been a bit of a lack in the past, to really see the trustworthiness in the wireless connectivity. Because if we compare it to sensor-based information, which we directly, let's say, control within the vehicle, there are a lot of influences on wireless signals. And one of them is that we for sure see different partners changing rapidly in ad hoc communication. And this is a must for trust of the senders. And also I, as a receiver, have to really cope with this kind of challenge to be on a safe side, to ensure that our customers really get the right information in the right time, and that they experience the right functionality. So there are existing solutions. There are especially some solutions for PKI, so this public key infrastructure in Europe. But we had been missing, let's say, kind of a common approach for the US. So we saw a fragmented approach, which really created some kind of barriers, meaning trust, meaning compliance, meaning the cross-vendor interoperability and things like that. So there was a lot of motivation for 5GAA to invest in this field. And we, as BMW, were very happy to see this engagement in the 5GAA community. And therefore, it was, from our perception, a big step forward. And we're really happy and proud to be able to present some of the major results right here. I think it's now the time to switch to Peter, who might give us a bit more details of insight, what we had to do and how we had the chance to realize it. Peter, please.
Thank you. And next slide, please. So yeah, my name is Peter Lorenzi. I'm technical solution lead at Microsec. Microsec is dealing with the PKI, and we are focused on the PKI infrastructures, and we are providing SCMS also for North America. So why we needed this certificate policy? So the V2X deployments are depending on a secure, scalable communication between the car manufacturers the infrastructure providers, and the transport agencies. So in North America, as it was mentioned, the lack of a unified certificate policy created fragmentation and made it harder for different players to trust each other. So a shared certificate policy solved this by enabling interoperability across vendors and jurisdictions and ensuring compliance with global standards. And it also provides transparency for auditability and long-term ecosystem stability. Next slide, please. So a certificate policy is essentially the rulebook for digital certificates. So it defines how certificates are issued, managed, and trusted. It sets out the requirements for each of the participants of the SCMS ecosystem and clarifies each participant role and responsibilities. So the CP is different from a certificate practice statement, which describes the actual procedures for implementation. So the certificate practice statements practically defines how certificate authority implements the certificate policy. The CPs in general follow the RFC 3647 framework, which guarantees the consistency and makes them better to be compared. So the different certificate policies can be compared easier by each of them or all of them following this framework. And it makes also easier the work of the auditors. The 5G SCMS working group has taken global best practices and created a certificate policy that reflects the needs of all the stakeholders. Next, please. So before 5G stepped in, different companies had their different fragmented certificate policies. And this inconsistency reduced the trust between the stakeholders. That could also slow down the deployments as well. So 5G created a dedicated SCMS work item to harmonize the certificate policies in North America. This effort was built on proven models, which are listed here, to leverage the industry best practices. So together, these form the foundation of a common and trusted system. Next slide, please. And I will hand over the word to William now.
Great, thanks, Peter. Thanks, Joachim. So I'm William White. I'm a Senior Director of Technical Standards here at Qualcomm. I've been involved in V2X security and standardization since 2003, if you can believe it, as editor of 1609.2 and chair of the SAE Security Technical Committee, and contributor to 5GAA and ETSI, and helped to drive the harmonization between the IEEE standards and the ETSI standards in the late 2010s. So for me, seeing harmonization of approaches within regions and across regions as a way of reducing friction for deployment has always been a passion. And yeah, I'm very glad to see the progress that 5GA's helped to make in the direction of just clarifying what deployment looks like and making it easy for people with products in multiple markets to reduce the overhead due to differing requirements. So when we have our, in a practical manner, when we have our certificate policy, what does that actually do technically? It enables us to issue a certificate trust list. The CTL is a list of all of the trusted root CAs. What does trusted mean? Trusted means that they follow the certificate policy. As Peter said, they've written this CPS, this certificate practice statement that outlines the exact processes they use to make sure that they conform to the certificate policy, and that CPS has been appropriately audited. And so it means that you have consistency of behavior. All of the root CAs that are on the CTL can be trusted to behave consistently when it comes to making their own practices and to flowing those practices down to the CAs lower in the hierarchy that actually do the job of issuing the certificates to the end entities, which are what actually get trusted in the system. All of this CA work is really just putting the paperwork infrastructure in place so that when it gets down to the actual application, the basic safety messages, the signal face and timing, signal preemption, and all the others. Back to the similar slide. So when these end entities are sending messages, other end entities know exactly what it means that those messages have been signed by a certificate that chains back to the CTL. So the CTL establishes this shared trust anchor across all of the SCMS participants, vehicle, the infrastructure, the back-end systems. If it chains back to the CTL, you know that it's the end entity certificate has been issued under the exact conditions that you expect, the exact conditions that you, the receiver, need in order to trust this. And one nice advantage of this is we've got multi-vendor interoperability without bilateral agreements. So it's not like BMW needs to make a deal with Volkswagen or Ford to trust messages from the other vehicle certificates. It's not like each OEM needs to go to each individual municipality that's running its own intelligent transportation system and say, prove to me that you're trustworthy. So long as you can demonstrate to the relevant management authority that you are conformed with the certificate policy, then you get to go on the CTL, and that vastly increases the scalability and reduces the burden on other participants in the system of knowing who to trust. So it ensures relying party can validate certificates from any trusted user. That requires the CP, as I said, because the CP defines clearly and unambiguously rules, all the criteria, life cycle controls, everything needed to include CAs in the system. Without a CP, you don't have this formal, okay, these devices, these systems are all behaving correctly, but what's the actual definition of correct behavior? So the CP is that definition that you need. So that's necessary for trustless inclusion and cross-system validation to actually mean something. And I say it enables scalable onboarding of new SCMS providers because all SCMS providers are following the same certificate policy. So a signed message means the same thing no matter who it comes from, no matter which CA it scales back to. And that makes writing receive side access control policies and trust policies much, much simpler. You don't need to distinguish between different CAs and different senders. So strategically, just to kind of reiterate, we're connecting diverse vendors under one trust framework. We're supporting regulatory and certification programs, and we're powering secure and interoperable V2X communications. Next slide, please. Okay, and now we're going to go through the certificate policy one chapter at a time, and Peter and I are going to kind of swap off as we go through this. So next slide, please. So the overall structure of the CP, as Peter was mentioning, there is an ITF RFC that provides a template for certificate policies, and we have followed this. And in fact, we've based this quite closely on the CITS certificate policy that was developed in the EU that follows the same RFC, again, in the interest of international harmonization and reducing overhead and friction for compliance between different vendors. So we look at foundations, operational controls, technical security controls, certificate profiles and trust lists, audit requirements, compliance actions, governance change management, and attribution. And again, that's following the standardized template format that's used. After the webinar, you'll be able to get the download slide set. We've got more detailed overview of each chapter in the appendix to these slides, and obviously the certificate policy itself follows this structure, so you can download the certificate policy from that link given, and you can have a look at the certificate policy itself. Next slide, please. So the overall is almost reiterating what we said previously, but going into a little more detail, beginning to dig down. So we'll start off looking at the CP as a whole and alignment with standards. So the CP defines the certificate policy for V2X PKI public key infrastructure services within SCMS. SCMS is Security Credential Management System. It's a very generic name. In practice, it's used specifically to refer to V2X communications. So a certificate policy talks about how you do secure certificate issuance, validation, and revocation for connected vehicle ecosystems. As I mentioned earlier, it's based on the EU CCMS CP. So CCMS is the connected vehicle credential management system. And that CCMS is licensed under CC BY 4.0. So there's an open use Creative Commons license. So it's entirely legitimate with attribution to use the EU CCMS certificate policy. So again, we're leveraging prior research and tooling. We don't have licensing or copyright barriers. We're based on IEEE 609.2.1, which is in turn based on the SCMS architecture that was developed by a number of different researchers with a lot of government and US OEM funding in an organization called CAMP, which I want to acknowledge. That is very important work that CAMP did from like the mid-2000s through to the mid-2010s. And that work turned into 609.2.1, which is the certificate management standard in use in North America. There's an equivalent at the 102941 that is slightly different in terms of the protocols. There's a very closely related Chinese standard as well. So in these three regions, we have slightly different protocols for doing certificate management, and 609.2.1 is the one that applies in North America. The certificate policy talks about conditions for issuing certificates to support signing or encryption in V2X, and the usage is restricted in high risk or unlawful contexts. So there's specific things that the certificate policy doesn't permit the CAs to do. There's actually an interesting discussion recently. There's some ambiguity in the wording in that it's not 100% clear in the European certificate policy whether it allows issuance of certs that would be used for messages that are then input to automated driving decisions. And clearly, that's something that needs to be clarified one way or the other. And the European policy, I say, is slightly ambiguous, and maybe this is something that we need to review going forward. At the moment, because V2X messages are being used entirely for driver awareness and warnings, there isn't any concern about this lack of clarity in the policy. But as we look at more sophisticated use of V2X messages, that might be somewhere where the European CITS and 5GAA and the North American organizations might need to look at whether there's some clarity that needs to be provided. Next slide, please. So this is the spaghetti diagram that everyone's very fond of in IEEE. This shows you the overview of the SCMS as a whole. The important thing is down the spine, we have the classical CA hierarchy, a root CA at the top in the middle, the top green box, issues certificates to intermediate CAs, which issues certificates to authorization CAs, which issues certificates to the end entities, the actual system participants at the bottom. And the root CAs are the ones that are directly managed by this SCMS manager organization. And you can see that that SCMS manager organization itself has some structure that we'll go on to talk about. So that's down the spine of this diagram. On the left-hand side, we have enrollment. So essentially, how do devices and entity devices get into the system? Because during its lifetime, a device will need to use multiple different certificates, will need to get certificates renewed. So there's one question of how a device authorizes itself to other system participants, to other end-entity devices, and it does that with the authorization certs. And then there's another question of how, when I go back to the cert management system and say, I need more certs, how does it know that it's okay to issue me with them? And that's on using this enrollment certificate. You can see over on the left, the enrollment CA, that issue the enrollment certificates, which are like your long-term, your non-transient identity that you use to interact with the certificate management system. And it's important to note, of course, you need this long-term identity to interact with the system, so the system knows which authorization certificates to give you. But the authorization certificates themselves can be anonymized or pseudonymized, so that if you're just driving around an ordinary end-user car, sending out basic safety messages, there's a number of techniques in use in the system to mean that you can't be tracked straightforwardly, that your privacy won't be significantly compromised by the fact that you're participating in V2X and sending these messages. And then over on the right, we have misbehavior authority. We have a whole infrastructure that's in place so that if devices get compromised, they start sending out bad messages, you can revoke them or make it so that they don't get new certificates. As I mentioned earlier, the system's built with privacy in mind, through the use of the enrollment CA and the pseudonym certificates. And so this whole misbehavior authority, misbehavior processing on the right, we've got some slightly complicated mechanisms in there, essentially to ensure that if you really, really need to, you can determine that a device is misbehaving and you can revoke its certificates. But even that doesn't let anyone in the certificate management system, doesn't let anybody know which device it was that was behaving. They know it's the device with these certificates and they can manage the certificates, but the device itself, who the car is, if it's a car, who is driving the car, if it was a car with a driver, all of that is completely hidden from the certificate management system. So we've got really rigorous processes in place to protect the privacy of system users. Next slide, please. And so here's how we're breaking down the system participants. And this doesn't map exactly to the 1609.2 profile, as in the terminology is slightly different from what you'll have seen on the diagram in the previous page. But functionally, all of these entities here map to entities on the architecture diagram. So the SCMS management organization, which is just called SCMS manager on the diagram on the previous slide, it oversees policy updates, it manages the CTL. There's a policy committee that handles revisions to the certificate policy. Like I was saying, there could be a need for clarity as we move more towards V2X-enabled automated driving. The CTL committee is in charge of validating that root CAs are eligible to be included on the CTL, so that the CTL can then be updated with new CAs. We have a process whereby a CTL is signed by multiple different electors, which are really just kind of CAs, whose job is only to sign the CTL. And there's a quorum that 3 of 5 signatures must be valid to trust the CTL. The reason for that is that if you have a CTL that just has one signer, when that signing certificate expires, is a moment of great fragility for the system, because if the signed certificate expires, then a receiver needs to know what to use to verify the next CTL. And if they haven't received the cert to verify the next CTL before the current cert expires, then they're locked out of the system and they essentially need to be manually rebooted. So in 1609.2.1, we have this model where you have electors, you have 5 electors, they have kind of staggered lifetimes. So even if you receive a CTL that's got 5 electors on it and you don't receive anything for 2.5 years, in the interim, 2 electors' certificates may have expired, but you still have 3 that you trust. So you would have to be offline for a very long time in order to need some kind of manual reinitialization. So that's a nice robustness technique that's actually been discussed in the European context as well. Currently, the European TLM is CTL is signed by only a single entity, and there's some discussion recently of migrating it potentially into the direction of having multiple signers to reduce this issue of fragility. Publication center, all the documents need to be published. Some of them need to be machine readable. Some of them need to be human readable. PKI auditor, all those SCMS providers and electors, and the auditor needn't be a single organization within the SCMS management organization. It can be an organization that accredits auditors. So, for example, there's requirements that SCMSs, that root CAs have undergone a web trust audit, which is a type of audit of CA service providers that's in widespread use on the internet. And there's a large number of private organizations that are accredited to act as web trust auditors. Any of those web trust auditors are acceptable. So the PKI auditor role here is partly actively carrying out audit and partly accrediting other organizations to carry out the audit of particular parts of the certificate policy. So that allows, scalable provision of audit services and reduces costs and means that you're working with a known, if you're a CA, you're working with a known quantity when it comes to getting necessary audits done. And then, of course, the SCMS providers, who are the ones that all this is trying to enable, so long as you're doing the right thing. The SCMS providers are a key participant in the PKI. The root CA is the one that demonstrates compliance with the CP to the SCMS manager, and the root CA is responsible for enforcing compliance with the CP for all the CA certs below in the hierarchy. Next slide, please. One other thing, of course, is the CP may need to be updated, as we've already discussed. There's a policy committee that participates, VED stakeholders can propose changes. So this is some material that's very that's specific to the 5GAA certificate policy, similar to other certificate policies, but the 5GAA CP propose this concept of VED stakeholders. The CP is not currently operational, and so this whole process of how do you determine who's a VED stakeholder is not operational at the moment. But as a concept, that seems like the right way to think of it. There's a lot of stakeholders in transportation and automotive, who have significant responsibilities to safety of their customers and safety of system users, and so you want to make sure that it's really the people who might be significantly affected by changes in certificate policy are the ones who have the opportunity to propose and approve changes in certificate policy. The root CAs have to publish CPSs aligned with the CP. So if there's a change in the CP that needs to get flowed down to the root CAs, they need to communicate back saying, okay, we'll update our CPS on this timetable. They need to get back and have done it, and then they can continue. So there's, whenever you have change, you need to plan for a transition, and the mechanisms for planning for the transition are laid out in the CP. CPS changes obviously need to be audited and documented, just like initial enrollment needs to be. And the definition that we use, or the terminology that we use, is in 1609.2.1, because that's the North American standard. As I mentioned, in Europe and in China, there's very similar protocols that use slightly different terminology, and unfortunately, the terminology isn't 100% harmonized. So you still need to context switch slightly when you're looking at what do I do in Europe versus what do I do in the US. But we've tried to align things as much as possible. Next slide, please, and I will be handing over to Peter at this point. Or no, I'm doing this slide. Sorry, last one. Okay. So this kind of summary where what we do with the CP, where the functional benefits are, we're establishing the trust, we're specifying who publishes the certificates, we're outlining naming conventions, so essentially not because the names have a functional role, but but more because if you have consistency around naming conventions, it's just one less thing for everyone to think about, and you don't need to go, oh, this name looks very different from this name. Is there a meaning associated with it? Because there's basically no meaning associated with the names, it's good to have a naming convention so people don't get confused. Talk about how we do verification of entities requesting new certificates, renewals, reissuing, and that part is almost the key part from the point of view of the end user. This is how CAs say, oh, you're asking for BSMs, let's make sure that you're the type of device that sends BSMs. You're asking for signal preemption, let's make sure you're operated by an emergency response organization, that kind of thing. And finally, certificate lifecycle management. So lifecycle management for all of these types of certificates. How do they get issued? How do they expire? What do you do if the device is out of contact for a significant period of time, and so on. And now I will hand over to Peter. Next slide, please.
Thank you. So Chapter 2 is mainly focusing on compliance. So it defines who is responsible for publishing the certificates, how they must be published, and in what format they should be published. So this chapter ensures that alignment with the various industry standards. So by following these standards, we can guarantee that PKI operations are both trustworthy and regulatory ready. So this chapter helps to ensure that the V2X automotive and intelligent transport systems meet the legal and also the industry requirements. Next slide, please, and I will give back the word to William for the chapter 3.
Yeah, so another thing that we're doing in chapter 3 is we're improving interoperability, and this is to an extent a reiteration, but in chapter 3 we're talking about compatible certificate policies, mutual trust across organizations, all that good stuff that allows field devices to operate in a multi-vendor, multi-operator environment with confidence that they're getting messages that they can trust. So as it says, that's essential for SCMS for V2X, where vehicles and infrastructure must validate certificates from different issuers. And that gives us a foundation for transparency, this common certificate policy accepted by all the stakeholders. And that creates shared expectations, clear validation criteria, a unified trust model for multi-vendor and cross-border deployments. And here, cross-border, we're interested in particular in land travel between the US and Canada, between the US and Mexico, potentially further down in Central America. And the goal, one of the motivating factors in developing this certificate policy was an observation that there were kind of industry initiatives in the US. There were by particular stakeholders, there were government initiatives in Canada, and there seemed to be a risk that they result in marginally different certificate policies. And the question of, well, if you have something that gets a certificate in the US, is it fully trusted in Canada and vice versa? So a goal of this work that we've carried out is to try and develop a certificate policy that's a union of both of those certificate policies, so that if there's a move to adopt this certificate policy, all jurisdictions, all areas can feel comfortable adopting this, and that's going to make cross-border deployment very important. And obviously, in the auto industry in the US, there's a lot of cross-border travel anyway, so it's particularly close to the heart of the auto industry. Next slide, please, and I'll hand back to Peter.
Yeah, so chapter 4 covers the full life cycle of the certificates, from the issuance and renewal to the modification and also the revocation of the certificates. So it describes the submission and approval flow. For example, that how the electors can communicate with the SCMS manager, or how the intermediate certificate authorities connect to the root certificate authority, and also how, for example, the end entities receive their certificates and from which entity they should receive which certificates. It also outlines the authentication process where authorities validate the request and issue the certificates using the IEEE 1609.2.1 or the X509 protocols. This chapter also defines strict timelines for rekeying and revocation. For example, a certificate revocation list must be updated within 24 hours if a compromise occurs. Finally, it emphasizes that relying parties must validate the entire certification chain, so no blind trust is permitted. So that means that it should be make sure that the trust list or the trust can be routed back or get back to the root, which is on the elector or the signed on the signed certificate list, trust list. Next slide, please. Chapter 5 focuses on risk management. It establishes the cryptographic standards, so it names the cryptographic standards that can be used, the approved algorithms, also the key sizes, and the certificate lifetimes. It defines incident response procedures, so how to detect a compromise, how to revoke the certificates, and how to notify the affected parties. It also describes the infrastructure protections, such as the physical, procedural, and personal safeguards to prevent the unauthorized access. And finally, it also ensures that continuity through backup, recovery, and misuse prevention protocols, so the system remains resilient and trustworthy. Next slide, please. Chapter 6 is all about transparency. So public certificate policies demonstrate to customers, partners, and regulators how the PKI operates. They reinforce the credibility and market acceptance of the SCMS infrastructure. So the CPs are following standardized RFC 3647 structure, making it more comparable and easy to be reviewed. And this level of openness strengthens the trust across the ecosystem. So this is very important to have this transparency, because with transparency, everybody can be sure that the other player in the system who he trusts has the same system in place. So there can be no occurrences of a lower security system that one trusts and that can be broken. And in this case, the whole system can be compromised because they are trusting each other. So these entities trusting each other. Next slide, please. So chapter 7 highlights the importance of audits and trust lists. So a well-structured certificate policy allows the independent auditors to verify the compliance. It is often a prerequisite for formal trust list inclusion or certification programs. With the certificate policy in place, a certificate trust list can be formally created and maintained. That means that whoever is compliant to the certificate policy and has its certificate practice statement, which means that the certificate authorities should define how they are compliant to the CP, to the certificate policy, and this is written in a certificate practice statement, the CPS, and this CPS can be audited and checked against the certificate policy. And this ensures the interoperability and the shared trust across the multiple vendors and jurisdictions. Next slide, please. Chapter 8 sets the clear audit requirements for all SCMS roles. So it practically defines the frequency and scope of the audits. It outlines the consequences of non-compliance. That is practically that the authority cannot issue any more certificates for sure, and maybe the previous certificates should be revoked. It also specifies the qualifications of the auditors. So what kind of entities can audit these systems, and these qualifications were set in mind of balancing the assurance and the flexibility. The outcome is a scalable model of onboarding and lifecycle management that maintains the trust across the system. Next slide, please. Chapter 9 through 11 deals with the governance and change management. So these chapters describe how an SCMS member can propose updates to the certificate policy, and how policy committee reviews and votes on these changes quarterly. Approved changes are published with clear transition timelines, and all root CAs and electors must comply to these changes. The certificate policy itself is based on the European CITS certificate policy from 2019, and this is licensed under Creative Commons attribution, and this also ensures transparency and openness of the policy. Next slide, please, and I hand back the word to William.
Excellent. So I think we're coming to the end. Next slide, please. So just to summarize what we've said so far, with many thanks to my co-presenters for such a kind of clear outline of why this is important, what's in it. So certificate policy matters because it provides a clear, actionable framework for security and trust. It reduces uncertainty for commercial deployments and also government-sponsored and other types of deployments. It aligns stakeholders under a unified compliance and governance model. And a good certificate policy translates into action. It's well-structured. It consolidates regulatory and standards-based requirements into clear, actionable deliveries and executable tasks for SCMS stakeholders and auditable checkpoints for ecosystem trust. As we noted, this was compiled by 5GAA, published in August 2025. I want to acknowledge Victor Varga from Microsec did a tremendous amount of the actual legwork on the certificate policy. It's much appreciated by us and by everyone who participated in that work item. And implementation is underway by SCMS stakeholders. There have been lots of good interactions with 5GAA and non-5GAA and recent 5GAA members in North America, and general alignment on the idea that this formal RFC-based certificate policy is the right way to go, and hopefully points the way towards a unified certificate policy for the whole North American ecosystem. That's slightly speculative, that's the dream, but we think we've done a lot to make it possible to move in that direction. So if you'd like to know more, if you'd like to know more about the technical details, go ahead and download the policy. If you'd like to ask us any questions, please use the Q&A functionality, and look forward to taking your questions. And thanks very much to you for listening, and to my co-presenters for co-presenting.
Thank you very, very much, William, Joachim, and Peter. That was much appreciated, and we've got some hands raised, so I'll just repeat again. Please put your questions in the Q&A chat, and we'll make sure we get through all of them. We do already have one, which not addressed to anyone specifically, so I'll ask it to the three of you. Who is doing the certification and audits, and who accredits them?
So because I'm unmuted, I'll go first. So that's an operational choice. That's not in the policy itself directly. So the policy says that there's this certificate policy authority, and the certificate policy authority is in charge of, or within the SCMS manager organization, there will be a group, a committee that's in charge of accrediting auditors, and it can outsource or delegate that. So as I say, there are already accredited web trust auditors, and so the operators of the certificate policy, the SCMS management organization, can always say, "Will any accredited web trust auditor is appropriate for doing this auditing task." So the CP and the CP white paper that we've written says, here's the structure of the management organization, here's the group inside the management organization that will have responsibility for identifying who does the audit or who's accredited to do the audit. But that is a kind of, I say, the later operational stage. So that group itself, those identified people don't currently exist in the framework of this CP, but will in future. I don't know if Peter or Joachim has anything they want to add to that.
Maybe a general remark. So we have mentioned certain sources of input where we tried to really find best practice and really included it into this work. And there you also find some of the partners which are able to really let's say practice this kind of policy, but that doesn't mean that others would be excluded. So it's an open market, and there are certain players in the market, and we really hope that this policy is adopted, and the broader this ecosystem will be, the more beneficial for a fast rollout, let's say. And I mentioned that we had some lacks in alignment, and we really wanted to support the ecosystem there at the point. I read just one comment in the chat, a direct question: how to contribute to 5GA? Yeah, well, everybody's welcome to contribute. As a member of 5GA, you're open to participate in the working groups and in such specific work items as well. So more than happy to see you in 5GA in future. You are your organization, your company. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Actually, my colleague will be posting a message just for questions on joining 5GA membership. My colleague will be posting an email address that you can send these in and receive not just a bit more information, but also some supporting material about what membership is like and different options that you have for that. Of course, we welcome interest and requests for future membership. An additional, we've got a few more questions coming in. I'll try to get to them. Can you provide a few more examples? For example, who decides that an ambulance can send a signal preemption request? How is it practically done? Are there any practical examples you can provide so that the audience get a better idea into how it differs in different circumstances?
So I was going to put Peter on the spot here, actually, but the way it's structured is there's the authorization authority that issues the certs is in charge of determining the entity it's issuing certs to is entitled to them for some definition of entitled. So inside the certificate policy, we have the ability to define requirements for specific applications. In this certificate policy, in its current stage, I don't think we've drilled down quite that far, and so that's kind of why I'm looking for clarity from Peter. I know in the European certificate policy, there's a lot of discussion about, government applications and how to ensure that they're being operated by an authorized government entity. But in practice, CAs will have a requirement on them to make sure that they're interacting with an authorized organization of the correct type. So you are interacting with an emergency services provider, and then the emergency services provider will vouch to the CA that, here's a certificate response from an actual ambulance or a certificate request. And then the CA will go, okay, with this kind of assurance from the device operator, it's okay for me to go ahead and issue the certificates. So I don't know if that's concrete enough for your question, Maxime, but that's kind of the outline, and I'll let Peter fill in any details that need to be filled in.
Yeah, so in in practice, it is that, when one of our partners are asking for such certificate, then we should double check if they have the necessary permissions to use these certificates, and this permission should come from the government body that has this role in the country to issue or to use such certificates. So, for example, the police, then if they want to use it in a police car, these certificates, then the permission should come from a police department that, yes, this is our car, these devices we are using, or we are interacting with this company or operator, and yes, we would like to use these certificates, and they should be given the permission to be able to be used. So we should double check these. And back to the first question, regarding the qualifications of the auditor, it is practically listed in the 8.3, chapter 8.3 of the certificate policy. So we are listing different qualifications for the SCMS providers. For the SCMS providers who can audit them, and also for the end entities. But it's a quite broad list of qualifications, so it's not really restricting the market.
Thank you very, very much. And we've only got 2 minutes left, but there's still some more questions coming in. If I don't get a chance to read through your questions, I will send them on to the speakers, and we will share the answers over email, so we will not forget about them. One question come in just as you were answering. What about DSRC versus CV2X worldwide strategy and harmonization? And what impact, and how does SCMS go into this? What is the impact? Joachim, I can see, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I saw you starting to react, so I'm pleased to give you the floor.
That's an important question, and Maxime already stated that this CP here, this policy really will apply both to the different radio technologies underlying. So we're talking about a security mechanism. As I pointed out, this is very important that we really gain trust in the wireless connectivity system. And as I also said, we have complementary approaches, and it really depends on the functionality, on the use case, which communication path we have to use. And therefore, we took a lot of focus that both it is applicable to DSRC, or let's say the VLAN P, so 11P, because DSRC in US is no longer relevant because of the FCC decision to have the favor of CV2X technology also in the US, like in China, as I mentioned. And therefore, for us, it is important, if we choose direct communication mode, we need this policy being applicable. And on the other side, if we choose a network-based communication, this same policy also is possible to apply. Probably the urgency is not so critical as on the direct communication path. because usually you connect a vehicle to a known backend, but for inter-backend operability and trust, again, this kind of policy is required. So I would say we would not like to step back into such a quarrel discussion about technology. We are really focusing on a safe, on a secure approach for functional orientation for a wide ecosystem. So for me, that really was a big step forward in getting to deployment, and I hope that really this momentum will take place during the next months and years. And maybe last word, because I saw some question about future rollout. So I'm not entitled to make any announcements. So I can only cite what has been published in the past. So we do have the publication on the Chinese side for direct communication for CV2X. But as I mentioned before in our face-to-face meeting 1 year ago in Berlin, we are able with these kind of new platforms, which you also mentioned with a link and a press release from Qualcomm in this case, where we have centralized computer systems in a car, computational platforms. And one of them is for the automated driving system. Another one is for the telematics unit. And our platforms of the futures will be enabled to cover this communication technologies. Network is a well-introduced system. Direct communication is available in China and will be on the platform enabled to be a worldwide solution. That is our philosophy.
Thank you so much. I know that we are a few minutes over, and William, I want to give you the floor so you can say goodbye, because I know that you have a hard deadline. So
yeah,
please.
Unfortunately, I have the 1609 meeting where we're finishing off a significant bug fix revision for to 1609.2, so I do need to be there. But thank you, Dominic, for organising this, and 5GA for hosting, and Victoria for all her great behind-the-scenes work, and my co-presenters. And I hope this has been useful to you, the audience. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. Joachim. Sorry, I know that we are a few minutes over, so I want to say, hand the floor over to Joachim, first yourself, and then to Peter to give your thanks and goodbye. For the questions that we weren't able to respond to, we will send them to the speakers, and we will reply to you over email, so you will get your answers.
Yeah,
Joachim,
sure.
please.
So, well, not much to add. As I said, we have a platform approach, and this certificate policy really is one of the foundations for finding a fast rollout into the markets. And what we see on the function side or on the opportunities, there is a lot to do, or a lot of potential for V2X technology in this broad sense of being both network-based as well as on the direct communication side. So I'm really looking very positively into the future, and hope to see you in one of the next webinars. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joachim. Please.
Yeah, thank you for your time. And yeah, I also believe that this certificate policy was a big step towards the towards interoperability and security interoperability and security in North America. So yeah, there are still some points which needs to be discussed, like how the V2X, for example, can fit into this picture, and how this policy can be extended or with the V2X. But yeah, that will be the work groups. Some work groups are already dealing with that. So yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. And I want to say on behalf of the 5J Secretariat, thank you to everybody who did make the time to join. And of course, thank you to the speakers and to everybody who was able to contribute to this work. It is critically important. And I'm I was pleased and honored to be able to support it. On your screens, you will see the next webinar that 5J is organizing. Also, that will be in less than a month, and is also dealing with the aspect of trust and the securing of these technologies. So please do register. Any questions, whether it's on specifics to do with this topic of SCMS for our speakers, or about general inquiries to 5JA, we've posted the email in the chat. Please do feel free to reach out. We'll get back to you ASAP. And you can also look at our website, and there's more information there. Thank you all very, very much for your time this afternoon. Thank you again to the speakers and everybody who contributed to this work. And I wish you all a very pleasant rest of the week. Thank you.
Thank you.